Welcome to the Texas Legacy Support Network Show. I'm your host, Chris Doelle.
And this is a show produced by TLSN to help us all remember some of the great sports moments and sports people from the University of Texas. Now, the TLSN is not associated with the University of Texas. Instead, it is a free educational historical site that is highly insightful about some of those great University of Texas athletics stories. In this show, we take some of the great visuals, the great stories, the great history that is contained on texaslsn.org, and we try to bring them to life. We bring them to life by adding the voices of the people involved in the stories, as well as the people who were there for those stories. Anytime you hear something here on the TLSN show, rest assured you can find it on texaslsn.org. On this extremely user-friendly site, you will find much more information about the stories we cover here in the show. We are combining the best of both worlds. You've got the detailed narrative on texaslsn.org, and here you get the audio direct from those people involved. My job is to bring the stories from texaslsn.org to life and do that with audio. Your job is to enjoy the stories you hear and then dig in over at texaslsn.org.
Welcome to Season 1, Episode 2. In this episode, we will have a conversation with a walk-on to UT basketball. He came to the basketball program at a key moment in the history of UT basketball. My guest today is John Carsey. I will introduce you to him right after these messages.
Our last game, Friday Night Legends, was a big hit, and now you can play the greatest college football teams of all time against each other. Before now, if you wanted to see the 2019 LSU Tigers play the 2001 Miami Hurricanes squad, you were stuck with only your imagination. Not anymore. This new game allows you to play those dream matchups. 1945 Army Black Knights, considered by many to be the greatest team in the history of college football. 2014 Ohio State Buckeyes, featuring Ezekiel Elliott, head coach Urban Meyer, and offensive coordinator Tom Herman. 2005 Texas Longhorns knocked off number 1 ranked USC for their 4th national championship, and so many more. Saturday Legends is that game. What are you waiting for? Get in the game. Saturday Legends.
Get your copy at www.saturdaylegends.com.
All right, everybody, join me in welcoming John Carsey to the show. Mr. Carsey, how are you doing this morning?
I'm doing great, Chris. Thank you.
Oh, you bet. You bet. So I'm really excited. You know, you and I talked last week or something, and so I got to know you a little bit. But I'm really excited to tell your story as I walk onto the University of Texas basketball program. So let's start with where you grew up.
I grew up in Houston, born and raised. I ended up going to a small school, St. John's School in Houston, and graduated there in 1975 and then headed to Texas.
When I assume you played basketball in high school?
I did. As an aside, growing up, actually baseball was my favorite sport, but when I transferred to St. John's in 9th grade, St. John's didn't have a baseball team, so I just focused on basketball from there out. Wasn't a football player, but loved basketball and dedicated myself to that. I was a bit of a late bloomer, so physically, when I entered my senior year in high school, I was only 5'11", and I finished my senior year at 6'4". So wow. I went from a somewhat of a point guard to a tall point guard.
Right. So you went to one of these tall guys who had the skills of a point guard.
Yeah, and ultimately throughout my tenure at Texas, I was what today would be called a two guard. I was
nice.
I ended up growing to 6'7" in college and was a shooting guard.
So at high school, you must have had some success to make you think, hey, I want to try to walk on at UT.
Well, I did. Because of my growing stature, I wasn't even the best player on my high school team, but I was gaining prowess at a rapid rate, and that got the attention of some smaller schools, some junior colleges and Southwestern and some schools like that. But I was kind of committed to going to UT. All my buddies were going to UT, and I was a family legacy there. And so that's where I wanted to go, and I thought I would just throw my lot in as trying to be a walk-on.
Right. And so talk through that process of, did you just enroll in school and then just show up at the gym, or what does a walk-on go through?
Well, in my case, I just came and I contacted the athletic department and just said, what would one do to try and become a walk-on? And I was told that they were actually holding tryouts on a certain date. Leon Black was.
Right.
And so I showed up to Gregory Gym at the appointed time, and we had tryouts in the what we then called the annex of Gregory Gym. And it was primarily just a scrimmage. And we scrimmaged for some period of time. I don't know, maybe an hour or something. And they said, thank you very much. We'll get in touch with you. And they contacted me and said, you're selected.
You're selected, but you don't get a scholarship.
Which just thrilled me to no end.
Yeah.
And it happened to be the last year that we had a freshman team at UT. So that's what we formed, was a freshman team. And it was reminiscent of what I read and hear about the old barnstorming days.
Right.
We had limited budget, but we had a whole bunch of heart. Nice.
So what was I guess practice and day to day? What was that like under Coach Black?
Well, of course, Coach Black did not coach the freshman team. He was busy with the varsity team, but he was very involved in the freshman team, and we actually scrimmaged against the varsity. That's kind of what he used us for.
Right.
Was scrimmage fodder, if you will. But what was great about Coach Black was that he didn't seem to see us as just that. He was very interested in the development, I think, because the next progression would be whether he wanted any of us to join the varsity after that year. So he was very hands-on, he and Coach Dowd, his assistant. So he was very instrumental in developing us as players.
Nice. And most freshmen connect with one of the assistants early on, much more so than the head coach. Did you have an assistant coach that you connected with?
Barry Dowd. He in fact, at that time and then moving on, he stayed on as Abe Lemon's assistant, and frankly, we always he was the player's coach. He was sort of the liaison. That's who we, in many ways, dealt with the most on a personal level was Coach Dowd, who I just love. He was a wonderful, wonderful man.
Nice. And how did campus life treat you as a walk-on, and compared to the scholarship athletes?
Well, Actually, not so bad. Of course, we were on our own for residential matters. We were just students, so I happened to live in the Adobe Tower my freshman year. They did hook us up with what was then the athletic dining hall. So we had meals with all the scholarship athletes, and really the only difference is that we didn't live in either Moore Hill or Jester.
Right.
But that I could see, other than the camaraderie that you would have gotten from living with the other players, there wasn't a tremendous amount of difference. We went to the same functions that would be had for whatever reason. So it was very similar.
Right. And what about the fan base during that time? Because UT basketball had a really strong history, and then like this black hole of time where it didn't do a lot.
Right.
Fan base like during that time?
Well, we played our games before the varsity games.
Mm-hmm.
So we kind of benefited from those who would come early for games. I would say that on the average, and of course back then everybody played in Gregory, and I forget what the capacity was, but maybe 5, 6, 7,000. I forget what it was.
Oh.
And so I would say that depending on who the varsity was playing, we would play before anywhere from 0 to 100 fans.
Right.
just depending on their interest. And some people actually became just fans of the freshman team. There was a gentleman, Mr. Bailey, I forget his first name, but he was just a huge UT supporter generally, and he was there at every game. And bless his heart, he was a big photographer, and so I came out of that with a slew of photographic memories, because after the season, I presume he sent it to all the players, but he sent me a big packet of photographs he had taken of our games. So that was very nice of him.
Yeah, that's got to be something that's amazing to have and to look back on.
Yeah. And one thing, just kind of an anecdote here, but I was telling you about the limited budget we had. If you can believe it, in college athletics, our process for uniforms was just like high school. We went to the manager doled out our uniforms, and then at the end of the year, we turned our uniforms back in, and then they would be issued the next year. In our case, however, we had hand-me-down uniforms, and they didn't all match. Some of us had different colored shorts. I think probably all the tops were the same, but we were a little short on britches.
Nice. Cool. So I guess after freshman year, obviously it went well enough that you're like, okay, I'm going to hang in with this. This seems like something I want to keep doing. Take us through your next season.
Well, I ended up being the leading scorer on the freshman team, so I was pretty confident, and Coach Dowd and Coach Black gave me every indication that the next year I would be taken into the fold on the varsity team. But unfortunately, at the end of that season, Coach Black was reassigned, and they hired Abe Lemon. So it was in flux. So I came back that fall, which I guess would have been the fall of '76, and I was basically informed that they were holding tryouts again. Of course, Abe Lemons didn't know me from a hole in the ground, so we had tryouts just as we had the year before, but in this case, Lemons didn't take any walk-ons. So I sort of figured that was the end of that run. But ended up, and of course I was just a basketball junkie, so I was constantly playing pickup games at Gregory and actually playing with at least during the off season, playing with the varsity players and such. And late in the season, I was actually just walking through Gregory on my way to class, and Coach Dowd approached me and said, "Hey, are you in shape, and would you like to come out and play?" Well, naturally I would, and ends up what had happened was, as is, not unusual with a new coach, his style and his approach and such had caused a few defections on the team. And so by the end of the season, he was down to 9 players. They didn't have enough players to even scrimmage. And so I became that 10th player. And I want to say, well, I know that the season was over and they were going into the Southwest Conference tournament. So whatever that time frame was,
it was well into the season.
Oh yeah, it was the end of the season.
Yeah,
and so I practiced with the team for however long that was, and then we played our first round game and lost to Ira Terrell and SMU, and so once again, the season was over. I had a great time for that week or so. Actually, believe it or not, I had news articles written, a couple, one in the Statesman and one in an old paper called the Austin Sun. They were somehow intrigued with the fact that I had shown up at the end of the year. So that was over, finished out the rest of the year, and did not know my status then at all. I was frankly kind of a shy kid, so I felt it wasn't my position to go really find out. So I just spent the summer working out as if I might be on the team, and never heard anything from the athletic office, and showed up the following fall, and similar in a way to the previous season, I was playing in Gregory, this time early in the fall, and Coach Dowd approached me and said, "Hey, Carsey, where you been? You're late for practice." And so that's when I found out that I was actually on the team.
Nice.
So I was the only walk-on for the next 2 years, and it was fabulous.
So you talk about the defections under Coach Lemons. What did he inherit in terms of starters that had played significant roles? Which athletes did he inherit?
Well, he inherited, I guess, first and foremost, looking back retrospectively, he inherited Johnny Moore. Johnny was a freshman with me, and then Mike Murphy was one of the players. Let me see, Tom Nichols, Gary Goodner. Those are the ones that come to mind because I know Abe's first year, his first recruiting class, he brought in Ron Baxter, Jim Krevax transferred from Auburn, and he brought in Tyrone Branyan, among others. Actually, Baxter came in with, it's kind of a package deal with some other California players, Dave Shepard and Keith Stevens. He kind of brought in this crew of 4 from California. And then unrelated to those four was Tyrone Branyan, who had been playing at a junior college in California as well.
Right.
So he inherited Johnny Moore, and he recruited what ended up to be basically the starting five for the time I was there, which was Moore, Krevax, Baxter. Of course, we had Goodner, and then Tyrone Branyan.
Nice. And so with the switch to Coach Lemons, how did workouts change? How did the practices evolve?
Well, they were far less structured. Basically, we did some warm-up drills, and then we split up into what we called the orange team and the white team, and generally we just scrimmaged for several hours. And Abe saw what he wanted to see in those scrimmages. He would, from time to time, blow his whistle and come out and say what he had to say, but that was it. We did not do many, structured drills. We had no plays because he just inserted a motion offense, and so we had virtually zero plays. I guess the only thing you would consider plays were inbounds plays and such. And then, of course, our defense was his matchup zone, and we had matchup zone and man-to-man, and that was it. But kind of bringing in the defection idea is that Abe, to his benefit or detriment, his form of discipline and teaching and such was caustic humor.
Right.
And a lot of people just couldn't abide by that. And I think they found it, at times, certain people, it just depending on your personality, but certain people just found it demeaning and not something they wanted to put up with. One person that comes to mind is a guy named Rich Parsons, who was a center for us, and Abe just rode him mercilessly. And he, in fact, I think he was the guy, the last affection that opened the spot for me to join that first year.
Wow.
At the end of the season.
Right. And the media kind of remembers him as the cigar-chomping, wise-cracking, funny person. Was he that in practice, or was it just the acerbic wit that you guys got?
Well, as I've always said, he was hilarious unless you were the butt of the joke. And so, there was definitely two perspectives. I mean, for the media and the public, he was hilarious, and he did. Most practices, he would sit up in the stands surrounded by several media guys, and I'm sure he was just as funny as he could be. But on our end of it, maybe not so funny. Right.
Talk about the transition, because love him or hate him, things changed. So talk about Texas becoming a winning program and you being there to experience it.
Well, that is, I think every player, whether a star out of high school, whether scholarship, whether walk-on, if you don't have the belief that you are good enough to be the star of the team, you probably don't need to be there, even if realistically, it's not going to happen. So Abe, for whatever he was, he had a very workable and successful system. And I don't mean to give the impression that everyone was hangdog all the time. I mean, we loved his system, and I'll digress here. Abe only had 3 rules for the entire team, and that was: don't be late for practice, don't be late for the game, and don't get arrested. And that was it. We had no curfews. We had no dress codes, nothing. So it was a very easy system to work in. The offense we ran, the defense we ran was just very successful. And I guess because of the lack of, to some degree, structure, everyone was involved in the program. Every practice was actually a tryout for the upcoming game. This idea of the white team and the orange team, well, the white team was 5 jerseys.
Right.
And those were the purported starters. But at any given practice, if an orange team player, regardless of who it was, elevated themselves to a point where A believed that person was doing better than one of the people in the white jerseys, he would stop practice and he would have you trade jerseys with that player. And then if you could maintain that until the last practice before the next game, you were the starter.
Right.
Now, in my case, I got the white jersey a couple of times, but I think that was more of a motivational tool. I don't think he really was going to start me that next game, but the player I replaced believed that was the case. And
right.
It would light a fire under that person.
Well, and it seems like it would help both of y'all because it'd motivate you, too. It's like, oh, there's a chance I could be in this jersey.
You bet.
Yeah.
You bet. And, it made it fun. And, of course, being a walk-on with my history, I had no sense of entitlement. So
right.
Everything was exciting, and every time I got to put on a white jersey, it was exciting. And really just the involvement of the team every day in itself was very buoying. I mean, everyone played every day. There wasn't any, I've been a week and I didn't play in practice and I didn't play in the game. I've just been sitting here the whole week. That never happened. And
right.
So everyone was very involved, and amongst the players themselves, because of this kind of socialistic approach, everyone was an equal. The only difference was who was in the white jersey and who wasn't.
So speaking of the white jersey and game day, I think you relayed a story to me that, if he didn't have to substitute somebody, he wouldn't. Yeah.
He admitted years later, and actually to me specifically, that he did not trust himself to substitute. He was kind of simple that way, and he knew what he liked, he knew what he had, and if he could play 5 players the entire game, he would. Now, obviously, people have to rest, so there were 1 or 2 players that he would utilize to give guys a breather, but he wanted to get those guys back, those starters back in as soon as he could. And it maybe got frustrating for people, particularly scholarship players that were stars in college or in high school, and and weren't getting the playing time that they expected to get. And funny enough, when in kind of preparation for this, I was looking back at our team rosters, and I saw that lack of playing time for some people, the roster was significantly different from one year to the next. I had kind of forgotten players that had come in and then said, this isn't working for me, and transferred out. But that
was the question I had for you. What was, I guess, the incidence of transfers, was that as high back then as it is now? Because now it seems like it happens every 10 minutes.
Well, no, I wouldn't say as high as it is now. And it wasn't sort of a one and done deal. Yes, there were a couple of players that came in and then left after a year, but what I saw was more players would hang in there for a couple of years, and then when it wasn't happening, they might leave. But it wasn't a revolving door. And in part, I think it was because of this idea that everyone had this notion that, it's open. There's nothing, open and shut where somebody would tell you, I don't know, you kind of hear old football stories about guys being recruited and then somebody telling them, well, you're probably not going to play until your junior year. I mean, there wasn't any of that. It was when people came in as a freshman, they had their shot.
Nice. Well, I've been reading back through some of the histories of the seasons and the games, and the one season where y'all lost by 2 points to Houston, missing the NCAA tournament. Some of these games, give me some stories from some of these games that were impactful.
Well, one thing I think that is lost on a lot of people is that entire era, and I can't really tell you why, but the Southwest Conference became a very powerful conference. During the time I was there, Arkansas was a Final Four team. Houston, of course, was a great team all the time. It was prior to Olajuwon and that group, but they had great players. Of course, Bill Yeoman. I mean, not Yeoman. What was his name? Their coach. At any rate, Texas A&M was really good. Baylor was really good. SMU was nationally ranked. Now, some of that ended up crumbling when we, when everyone quit being paid. But a lot of those games were impactful. I guess the ones that really stand out are the games with Arkansas and Houston, because they were head and shoulders above most teams. But that deal in the Southwest Conference where we lost to Houston, that was actually considered, at least by us and many, to be an upset.
Yeah.
And the result of that was that Houston won the tournament, and they got the automatic bid to the NCAAs, and then Arkansas, who had lost, got the at-large bid. And that's how we ended up going to the NIT.
Yeah, and there were only 32 teams in the NCAA at the time.
Right. And so, the NIT was a big deal.
Yeah.
And so we ended up getting the bid to go to that. Abe actually didn't want to go. He felt it was, he was upset that we had been kept out of the NCAAs. And so he sort of turned it over to Barry. In fact, kind of an inside story is that after that Houston game, we were in the locker room down in the Summit. And, of course, from our perspective, what we saw was Barry Dowd just came in and said, hey, you guys want to go to the NIT? And we were like, hell yeah.
Yeah.
That sounds great, keep playing ball. Well, what had occurred was that Abe had been approached and given a stack of stuff by the NIT committee, and so he talked to Dowd and said, well, do you want to go to the NIT? And he goes, yeah, sounds great. And he says, do you think the boys want to go? And that's when we when he came into us and asked if we wanted to go, hell yeah. And so he went back in, and according to Barry, Abe just threw the papers at him and said, well, great, then sign him up. And so Dowd was sort of in charge of all that. And we saw little of Abe until our first round game of the NIT. And we played Nebraska and Temple in the 2 home games, and that set us into the semifinals, I guess, the Final Four in New York. And boy, was that a great experience. I mean,
I bet.
I guess Austin's a little too big to consider us yokels, but a lot of us had never been to New York before.
As I say, it's no New York.
And Madison Square Garden, it was some sort of fun. It was a different era, and we got to New York, and we rode the subway to the Garden, and we were just on our own to get there. I mean, it wasn't a team event. It was like, all right, it's time to go to the Garden. So we all meandered down and found our way on the subway to the Garden. Tell you a funny story, though. We were practicing at New York University, and the Final Four was Georgetown, Rutgers, NC State, and us. And so during practice, you may remember that Ron Baxter, he was always considered chunky. And, I mean, he was just a big guy. But John Thompson, coach at Georgetown, was at our practice. And he was talking to Abe and watching us scrimmage. And Thompson singled out Baxter, and he said, hey, Abe, who's the fat kid? And Abe said, well, he's our star. And Thompson said, well, I figured he was either a star or kinfolk.
That's funny. In retrospect, it seems like y'all made a lot of people, I guess, eat their words for not inviting you to the NCAA, because you seemed to roll through the NIT.
We did. I don't think it's an understatement just to say that, I mean, we surprised everyone. We did not look like a classic team. We were undersized. Our post guys, Gary Goodner and Philip Stroud, Goodner was 6'7", Stroud was 6'8". So that was the tallest we had out there. And, of course, we had Krevax, who I think was maybe standing on a box, was 5'10", and, maybe 160 pounds. Johnny Moore was still a skinny kid, still growing. We had Tyrone Brannion, who was an enigma. He was a 6'7" pasty white guy who couldn't jump over a piece of paper, but he could score 35 points on a drop of a hat. When I say he was an enigma, he did not care about basketball between the end of the season and the day that it started back up. He didn't play basketball during those times. He didn't play pickup games. He didn't practice. He fished and hunted and did his Oklahoma thing. But man, when he laced it up, he just had this innate ability. He was very deceptive. I think people who remember him remember he had what I called the triple threat. He always held the ball down around his waist, which, any basketball coach would say, never ever do that. But he would. And he had this, he would shoot from his hip. So he would get the ball and face up, and if the guy didn't get on him, he would just fire his shot from his hip, mostly making it. And if a guy came at him at all, he would take one dribble one side or the other, and then he could shoot it then. But he was really something. And he was a little bit of a Rodman, Dennis Rodman, in the sense that he just had an innate ability to be in the right place for rebounds. Like I said, he couldn't jump at all. He couldn't even dunk. But he was always in position for rebounds.
Right.
And he'd rebound, and he'd just, put the shot right back up. And he did not look like a classic basketball player. Krivax didn't look like a classic basketball player. We had Baxter, who looked like a linebacker. Johnny Moore was the closest we had to somebody who looked like a regular basketball player. And so I think the combination of that, people just didn't, we were always underestimated. It looked like we were an easy mark, but like I said, the type of offense that we had was just deadly effective. And of course, those guys were all great scorers.
Yeah.
And, y'all can look at the stats, but I don't think any of our NIT games were closer than 10 points.
No, they were pretty much blowouts.
Mm-hmm.
Nice. So I guess after that, take us through the rest of your UT career.
Well, because after that year, we're all riding high. And by the way, that first year, that's when we moved into the Drum, the Irwin Center, and we were undefeated at home that year. It was an amazing season. And then we came back for the 78-79 season and had a similar year. I think we may have lost one or two games at home. Had a real good record. I don't recall, maybe like 21-6 or something.
Right.
We shared the Southwest Conference Championship again with Arkansas. And then that year we did get our first bid in years to the NCAAs. We went up to Moody Coliseum, and unfortunately, we were the ones who were blindsided. We played Oklahoma, who we were prohibitive favorites to beat, but they had a center, and I believe his name was Ron Beal, and in our practices, his name or countenance never crossed our radar.
Wow.
I think he averaged 2 or 3 points a game. And that particular game, he broke out and had something in the 20s, I believe. And essentially we never adjusted to him. And he was a big guy. He was like maybe 6'10". And so the fact that he had such a good game, we didn't have anything to stop him. We didn't have anybody big enough to stop him, and he kind of single-handedly beat us. And so we slunk out of there having lost our first-round game.
Nice. So I guess looking back on your basketball career, you're sitting around talking with friends. What are some of the things that pop into your mind quick as your favorite times?
Well, honestly, favorite times, you can just fill in the blanks of practices. Believe it or not, practices were really, really fun because of the things I've described. The whole, we're out here, everybody's fighting for a position. They were highly charged because it was all positive, but with everyone fighting for a job, it got pretty intense because some of those guys, particularly the Johnny Moores and such, were extraordinarily motivated, and so we had fights and scrapes and scraps, but nothing ever got personal and, carried back to the dorm or anything. But everyone, I think, looked forward to it. As I said before, there were maybe a few players who would get down in the dumps because they had expectations that weren't being met. But
right.
But it was very fun, and then even off the court was fun. There was we did a lot of stuff together. We went to clubs together. I think the statutes probably run on me telling this, but there were various restaurants in town that would provide us food for free.
Nice.
And so, there was a place called the Red Tomato, and their owners were big basketball supporters, and we could go in there and eat anytime we wanted. There was a place on 6th Street called Madison Square Garden, which was kind of a sports bar, very unique. It had a setup inside like bleachers, and then they had a big screen TV, which was one of the early rear projection big screens.
Yep.
Quality wasn't very good, but the beer was free, and and there were a couple other places, but we all kind of were a very cohesive group. And again, sort of relating to today, is that there was not any division among the players between race or anything like that.
Yeah.
And I know the Baxters and those guys would kind of take us all over to the east side, and we would go to clubs there and all over the place. And so I guess overall that whole concept was what was most fun, is that we were a band of brothers.
Definitely. And about, I guess, after graduation, you go on, give us a little background on what your life has been, and then your connection still with the college.
Well, my tenure ended because I had an extra year of eligibility, because my sophomore year I didn't really play basketball.
Right.
So I had a fifth year. And so when I came back for the 79-80 season, and it became apparent during the early part of the season, the November and into December, that here I was for my third year now, and it didn't look like I was going to get much playing time. And while I was still enjoying myself, I had a guy that I knew from basketball camps that I coached in the summer, who was a coach in Europe. And he contacted me and said that the American on their team, there was a quota in Europe at that time. There may still be, I'm not sure, but their American, or one of their two Americans, had broken his leg and they needed a player. And so I approached Coach Lemons and just sort of asked what the year looked like, and did he see me, in much of a playing role. And while he didn't say no, and I know I kind of put him on the spot, but he really wasn't able to give me a lot of encouragement.
Sure.
So I just said, I got a chance to get paid to go play basketball in Europe. So I left at the Christmas break and went over to Europe and played 3 years there. And it was the greatest decision I made. Ironically, in January, Baxter got injured, and that was likely a spot that I would have taken because, as it ended up, Baxter was the guy that I subbed for.
Right.
Whatever Abe's thinking was, that's just kind of the way it ended up. So, at any rate, that would have been a possibility, but it was far overshadowed by the experience I had in Europe.
Oh, I bet.
It was just great. I was finally able to be unleashed in my mind and play the basketball I knew I could play. And, I averaged 27 points a game, had a high of 63 my first year. And, and of course that was less perhaps just my incredible ability as it was that you were paid to score. And
right.
I remember when I first got there, I was going to be a good team player, and pass the ball and look for the open guy. And I got derided mercilessly by my coach. He said, "We are not paying you to pass the ball." So I just started firing it up, and it was a shooter's dream. But after a few seasons there, it was, as I say, I had seen all the monuments and museums that there were to see. And my last year there, because we practiced at night and played at night. And so we had every day just to fill. And so that last season, I don't know if bored is the right word, but I took a job in a fruit market for something to do during the day, and it was really fun. I was playing in France at the time, but I remember just kind of thinking, if I'm working at a fruit market, it's time to go home. And so I went back and went to law school at Baylor, and then I moved back here to Austin in 1984 and started practicing law, and I've been here in the same building since.
Nice.
I guess this year is 36 years.
Nice. And I assume you take in some UT basketball.
I do. I've got season tickets. I'm a big supporter, and then just the connection with the basketball team, particularly Shaka Smart, and bless his heart, I'm not sure how long he's going to be here, but he has been a great coach and a great liaison with the alumni. More so, I would say, than previous coaches, than Penders. Barnes was pretty good, but Shaka kind of stepped up the game. He has really reached out to the alumni and made it known that we are welcome at all practices, and if you don't have tickets and you want to come to a game, you just contact his office and he'll set you up. And he has started it's been a while now, but he has a sort of a banquet, if you will, at the start of every year, where we have a dinner at the club at the stadium, and he introduces the team, and we all mingle, and it's been great just for the interest in people in the team and going to the games.
Nice. So, and hopefully I'll see you out there at one of these games in the next season or two, if they play.
Yeah, I don't know what this year's going to look like.
Well, John Carsey, I want to thank you so much for sitting down with me, sharing what I think is a fascinating story.
Well, thank you so much. It's fun to tell it.
I want to thank my guest, John Carsey, for sharing his story and insight into what I consider a very pivotal time in UT basketball history.
To find out more information about this and a whole host of great information about UT athletics, head over to texaslsn.org. I want to thank you for listening. I want to thank you for what I consider the most valuable gift you can give, and that is your attention. Thank you so much for listening to these stories. And then, don't forget, If you subscribe on iTunes, on Stitcher, on Spotify, on iHeartRadio, any place you find podcasts, if you subscribe, you will get each and every episode as soon as it's published. Please help us by sharing these stories with anybody you can think of that is interested in University of Texas athletics. And make sure you also share TexasLSN.org.
For the Texas Legacy Support Network Show and TexasLSN.org,
I'm your host, Chris Doelle, reminding you, set your goals high and don't stop till you get there.